Great. Well, welcome everyone to our webinar today with Farfetch and Good on You. I'll just give another 30 seconds. I can see participants will still be entering throughout the next kind of minute or two. Maybe I'll just start with a quick intro to who I am. So I'm Flora Davidson, the co-founder of Supply Compass. It's a business that we started just under 4 years ago, really with a mission to make sustainable production accessible, efficient and cost effective, not just for fashion brands, but every player in the value chain. So at the core of our business, we are a production software for fashion brands and manufacturers, but through our platform, you can also access trusted and verified supply chains managed by our in-house team of production experts. So 2020 has been a turbulent year for fashion brands and supply chain partners and suppliers, manufacturers across the world. But I am excited to see today such an overwhelming number of you tuning in to bring kind of renewed vigor to this conversation of sustainability within the fashion industry. Before I introduce our panelists, there's a couple of housekeeping things to mention. There is a Q&A box at the bottom. Please put your questions in there. Lots of you have given questions before, which have been great. I looked through all of those yesterday and actually have kind of seeded in and fed in some of those questions into the kind of main body of conversation, but we will have time at the end for more questions. The recording, this is being recorded and we will share this after, so those who have missed it can catch it there. So let me introduce our two panelists. We have Sandra Caponi, who is co-founder of Good on You, the #1 sustainability ratings and discovery platform for fashion, and Tom Berry, who is global director of sustainable business at Farfetch. Tom has been working with companies on strategy and sustainability for the past 20 years, and he now leads sustainable business agenda at Farfetch. Welcome. Great to have you both here.
Good to be here.
Yeah.
So, I mean, let's start firstly, potentially around discussing the business case for sustainable fashion. You know, really, why should it matter to businesses and brands? And you know, really, why now? I mean, potentially that's for you, Sandra, to begin with.
I think the very simple answer is because consumers care. I mean, that's the whole reason why we started Good on You, because we realised back in 2015 that more and more people wanted to shop more sustainably. They wanted to know what was going on behind the scenes of the big fashion brands, and they wanted to make more informed choices. So yeah, this growing movement around conscious consumerism, I don't think is a secret to anyone anymore. It was definitely a growing trend last year, especially, and into 2020. It's all signs are pointing to its continued growth. And if brands don't respond by being more transparent, by meeting that rising demand for sustainable brands and products, then there's the risk that they'll actually lose part of the market.
Yeah, agree with that. What about for you, Tom?
Yeah, look, there's so many different reasons why businesses should be investing in sustainability. I mean, there's kind of, and it's a subject which has been around for a long time. I guess the kind of classic reasons why businesses and even fashion businesses in the past have kind of got into it have more been around cost or risk, and those reasons still exist today. You know, there are ways which you can drive environmental efficiencies in your business and save money doing it. There are increasing risks, both, you know, from a reputational point of view, Boohoo being a great recent example, but kind of the history is littered with those, but also kind of regulatory risk or even kind of physical risk from climate change and supply chain. So those two kind of core reasons still exist, but I think that the kind of key reason these days, and the exciting reason for me, is there's just so much growth opportunity associated with it, and that goes to Sandra's point about there is increasing consumer sentiment and demand in the market around these things, which is what most businesses and fashion businesses are set up around to deliver, but also just different ways of innovating and making money, you know, the kind of the circular economy and the different models which exist today, whether you're a consumer which is interested in sustainability or not. You might also be interested in reselling your clothes or in accessing brands which you couldn't before in the resale market. You know, kind of those are opportunities which exist, kind of sustainability aside, but they help deliver really good environmental and or social benefits. So yeah, there's so many reasons for businesses to get into it these days, and it's just about choosing those which feel most important, or there's most opportunity for you.
So that's, I mean, you mentioned an interesting point there around the kind of commerciality of sustainability. Is that something that, you know, can you see a commercial benefit in sustainability? I mean, that's really for both of you. Maybe Sandra, do you have any kind of indication or stats around, you know, consumer decisions really made around the sustainable credentials of a brand?
I think people were questioning the numbers and the commerciality for some time, sort of pointing to the fact that, well, of course people are going to say they want to make more ethical decisions, but are they really putting their money where their mouth is? And you know, especially again in the last 12 to 18 months, there's a lot of evidence supporting that. At Good On You, I mean, we've seen an almost doubling of our user base, the people who use Good On You to know the impact of brands and choose better, buy better brands. And that's resulted in, you know, increased conversions for the sustainable brands that we feature on our platform. There's also a cool report that List, the global fashion search engine, puts out every year, and that showed in 2019 that sustainability related searches for fashion went up 75% from the previous year, which is pretty significant. And I think in 2020 it was already up 37% since the start of the year. So quite a few, you know, evidence points, and obviously, not to take John's thunder, but, you know, there's growing support for platforms like Positively Conscious and other retailers that are stepping up and offering a sustainable fashion range.
Yeah, I mean, Tom, briefly, what indications are you seeing from a kind of search perspective on Farfetch?
Yeah, so I mean, just echoing Sandra's point, really, we've seen significant growth in the kind of conscious products that we sell through Farfetch. It's significantly outpacing the growth of the other products that we have, even though it's a smaller part of the range at the moment. So that's a really positive sign. And then in addition, the other kind of more sustainable bits, the offerings around the new services that we've launched in kind of resale or donations are seeing amazing growth. You know, they're kind of, people are looking for those kind of services. So yeah, really, really positive. And all of those models deliver commercially for us. So yeah, it's good, you know, really, really positive signs over the last 12 to 18 months. And
you know,
there's a lot of,
oh no, sorry, you go, Sandra.
I was just going to say, there's also a lot of anecdotal evidence just around the sheer number of people that are talking about sustainable fashion. You know, it's definitely hit the mainstream. I think when we started back in 2015, there was of course a group of people that were really advocating for change, but fast forward to this year, it feels like everybody from Instagram followers to Vogue are talking about sustainable fashion. And I think that's, you know, that's reflective of what customers and consumers want, but also that brands are stepping up and starting to respond.
And so do you feel that, you know, when it hits Instagram, is that a trend, or is it something that you feel is here to stay?
I think it's both. I think it's good that sustainable fashion is a trend, but you know, consumers are wary of this thing we all refer to as greenwashing, and don't stand for unsubstantiated claims or one-off commitments related to sustainable fashion. They're looking for long-term commitments from brands and meaningful ones that will have an impact over time. So Yeah, I mean, it's good that sustainable fashion is fashionable right now, but it's driven by people that care and realize that sustainability at its core is about creating an industry that can stand the test of time and protect people and planet well into the future.
Yeah, I think like the really positive things for me, there have been times in history, even in the last kind of 10, 20 years, where when we've hit significant economic crises or other forms of global, the environmental agenda has slipped down, both in terms of consumer kind of consciousness or other ways in terms of government focus or regulations. And that hasn't happened. We've had a massive global crisis recently with COVID, and all of the signs are, in terms of from what we've seen on consumers buying into it, but also all of the broader stakeholder discussions around kind of building back better and investing in the kind of green economy and a more sustainable economy in terms of supply chains and looking after workers in that. All of those things have increased, not decreased, and all of the projections around it. It's very difficult to see what's going to happen in the future, but I feel really positive that it hasn't kind of taken a back seat in a time where it easily could have done, given the level of the crisis that we've faced recently. So
I think that's a really interesting point. That's something actually that we've seen as a business during this period, that actually brands have come to us looking for sustainability as actually a superior solution to navigate through these times. We've seen, we've launched, for us, we're looking into dead stock as a solution to navigate around lower end minimums so that people can produce less, actually seeing sustainability as that solution. So I think that is really positive. So, I mean, Tom, obviously there was a recent interview with Jose on Business of Fashion that a few people have mentioned. So I'm really keen to understand from you, really, the role of retail in the sustainability conversation, and really where the responsibility lies from a retailer's perspective, in your opinion.
Yeah, look, different retailers are going to be different, but I guess from Farfetch's point of view, we're in part a retailer, and I think the kind of retail bit of the business, we've taken on the responsibility, if you can call it that. I mean, I feel like it's an opportunity really, about engaging and enabling consumers to buy into kind of better products, more sustainable products. And that is a kind of classic role for retailers, and some retailers are doing it better than others, I think. And I feel like that is the key way in which we're going to make an impact, particularly for Farfetch. It operates a marketplace model, so we don't buy much, we don't make anything. It's kind of the thing which we can do is leverage the amazing consumer relationships which we have to help drive better consumption, and that should rest on the key thing for me, and the reason why, in all transparency to those listening, we work closely with Good On You. But that's why we work with Good On You, because they're an independent source of standards and accreditation and ratings, and in addition to working with Good On You at kind of brand level, we look at kind of those independent standards, accreditations and ratings at a product level, and that's what you should base whatever you're talking to consumers about, and that should be the retailer's responsibility, is that you are being transparent about how you are engaging in that kind of sustainability debate. Sorry,
no. I mean, it's just on your point there of kind of working with independent bodies. I think we've seen over the last few years, technology play quite a significant role in this. I mean, Sandra, obviously you are a technology platform. Can you maybe tell us a bit about what role you think technology can play in this sustainability kind of conversation, or the future of building it?
Oh, it's just a huge enabler. I mean, anything that is complex and fragmented, like sustainability in fashion is, can be, streamlined and made sense of through the power of tech. And that's essentially what Good On You does. We we look at all the key indicators of sustainability in fashion. There are literally hundreds of standards and certifications and benchmarks in fashion. You know, they all have value because they're honing in on a specific issue or a specific segment of the market, from chemicals through to living wages and the largest brands to the smallest brands. And we use our tech, our brand rating system, to aggregate all of those leading indicators, to look at what a company or a brand is publicly reporting, and to make sense of that. We are assessing all of those indicators based on materiality, and then we're scoring and weighing all of those indicators to arrive at a simple 5-point score. And we just couldn't do that at scale and rate the thousands of brands that we've rated today without our brand rating system, which is underpinned by our technology.
Brilliant. I mean, kind of on that, maybe it's worth us even just touching on, to begin with, like how do you define sustainability at Good On You? As you say, it's a kind of complex matrix, and it's hard to kind of put one stamp on it. But what does it mean? And also, I think this was a question that came through a lot in the sign up questions, particularly in light of what's happened recently with Boohoo. But where does the ethical side fit in? Because often it's kind of pushed aside to talk about climate. But yeah, maybe just a bit on the definition of it for you.
I think we take quite a broad definition of sustainability, meaning protecting the future of our planet and its people when we design, create and wear our clothes. And for Good On You, that means starting with what we know are 3 material issues, but also main areas of concern for consumers. And that's a brand's impact on the environment, but also labour, you know, people who make the clothes, and animals. And within those 3 areas, there are, you know, many sub issues. I've touched on some of them already, but when we're looking at environment, it's about resource, energy, chemical and water use. When we're considering labour impacts, it's about knowing, tracing suppliers and ensuring workers are empowered and paid a living wage. And animal impacts goes to, you know, how animal materials are sourced. Are they minimised? Is the welfare of animals considered in the production of clothes? That's just a very high level view, but we're literally looking at hundreds of data points for each brand that represent all of those complex issues, and try to present that back in a simple, accessible way.
I mean, on that, how... And I think this is also for you, Tom. How do you get reliable and trusted information on the like the impact of products and the brands itself? I mean, that's often the question, is that it's that kind of authentication of it. How do you navigate that today, Tom? I mean, obviously you've mentioned you work with different businesses. But
yeah. Look, it's an incredibly challenging thing to do, and I don't think you know, at the moment there isn't any one perfect system. There isn't really a definition of a sustainable brand. Like, in a way, there's no one brand or no one product can ever be sustainable. Only a system can be sustainable as a whole. So it's kind of like, you know, it's almost you're never going to get there. But there are a whole load of things which you can do better and have more positive impacts around, and those are all the things which Good On You look at and do it in incredible detail. And the thing which I really like about the Good On You process and what we're trying to drive at Farfetch is that it helps transparency. You know, that it's based on publicly available information, and that, you know, that's what we should be using, as things that you're publicly willing to kind of talk about. You know, that's a good test of whether it's authentic or not. But then in terms of whether you can get any certification, there are hundreds of certifications out there for all those different types of issues. So it's just about looking at which ones are credible or not, and which ones have good governance around them or not, and then using the ones which do, and not using the ones which don't. So it's not an easy. There isn't a kind of one answer at the moment. There's been no kind of regulations around it to say this is these are the things which are the best things to look at, because it's so complex. So yeah, at the moment it's hard to find.
Actually, something that, so there's some questions come up in the Q&A box here about end of life of garments. This isn't something that we are working way more in the kind of early stages of the supply chain, but how, I mean, Sandra, is that something you rate? I know, Tom, you at Farfetch have a few partnerships in that space. What, you know, Tom, what are you doing in terms of extending the life of products?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think the reason we're looking at end of life is the two or three big issues in fashion. One is on labor standards in supply chain. One is on environmental standards in supply chain and how products are made of. The other big issue is just about what is made and how much of it is out there, and kind of whether that can be more efficient in its whole life. And the big issue which we've seen over the last 15-20 years is there's just so much fashion produced and not used long enough. So anything which you can do to extend the life of fashion which exists is great. So the things which we've done, and they're only part of that whole field, is a resale program for handbags. So you can come on and sell any handbag that you've got in your closet which is unused, and hopefully get it into someone else's closet who will use it, and in that instance not buy a new one, or donations. So a donation-led program, but also the donations basically is based on other people buying those clothes, so they then buy them and reuse them, and so it extends their life. And at the same time you get rewarded both by supporting a charity, but in the case, the model which we've set up with a company called Thrift, you get rewarded in terms of Farfetch credit for it. So yeah, it's kind of, there's a whole bunch. We are positively Farfetch sustainability agenda is pretty broad, and the kind of conscious consumer piece is one element of it. The circular business piece is another element of it, and then there's a whole chunk of work which we might talk about a bit, which is more about kind of being operationally cleaner. So yeah, there's a whole load of different things which you can do.
It's interesting, something that, I mean, a huge part of what we focus on as a business is actually the process. And I think it's often what's left out of the sustainability conversation. Obviously, materials are really, really important. And that, you know, that is a part of it. But even just your practices, how you manage your production process, how you manage your operations internally. And that, for me, that's where technology has a huge, huge role to play.
We're just about to release an updated version of our methodology. We try and refresh it and keep it updated as often as possible. And the latest version really does hone in on this issue of circularity. And well, the issue really is around waste, the sheer amount of waste that occurs in the production of clothes. It does start right from the resources to the manufacturing and often the textile, but also non-textile waste that comes out of that process. And then, of course, once we actually wear clothes and do something with them at the end, unfortunately, piles and piles of clothing ends up in landfill. So eliminating waste and creating, you know, moving away from that traditionally linear model of making and wearing and then throwing away clothes, being able to turn that into a circular model where we're putting those clothes and those inputs back into the system and eliminating or at least reducing waste will go a huge way to addressing the environmental impacts of fashion. Oh, Laura's on mute.
Sorry, apologies for that. I muted myself to cough. And actually, I mean, Sandra, this is a question that has come through from lots of people. Do you think we are heading towards an industry standard metric anytime soon, or do you think it is actually for each brand to define their own interpretation? Obviously, businesses like yourself, is that your goal, that you are the industry standard?
We're definitely trying to be the go-to source, and yes, standard is a word that can be used. We didn't want to create yet another certification that brands need to comply with, because we all know there's so many already. But in bringing together all of those leading certifications, we believe we've created a really robust, comprehensive way for assessing brands that consumers have been relying on as the go-to standard and info source for years now. And increasingly, retailers and other partners are able to leverage as the framework they can use to understand their own sustainability and the sustainability of the brands that they work with, and that they can communicate to their own customers. We definitely don't want to limit the Good On You ratings to just our platforms, but yeah, make it something that brands and retailers and industry can leverage and use to talk to their customers about sustainability as well.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, in terms of, I'm keen for us to talk a bit about consumers now. Obviously, this is what is on front of every brand's minds is what do their consumers want? I mean, I know there's a fair few consumers on this webinar, and obviously we are all consumers ourselves. How can we spot greenwashing? Maybe that's for you, Tom, first.
Yeah, look, it's a tough question, but I if you are interested enough to kind of dive into the details, that's what I would do. You know, you don't take a kind of claim at face value, and where possible, look for things that you know are kind of independent accreditation. So, you know, the Good On You tool is a great place to start, but you know, if something has an organic certification associated with it, that is a good mark of you know, kind of independent accreditation. If they just claim that it's biodegradable without any certification associated with it, that's probably not, you know. So, you know, there are different ways, but yeah, just looking for those independent marks. And if you want to take it another level deeper, look at what those independent marks stand for and whether they've got good governance around them. But, you know, to be honest, consumers in general, and I put myself in this category, you know, you don't have a lot of time to look into it. And it's, you know, so you're looking for simple solutions in a lot of cases. And so, yeah, retailers can play a role in helping that. So as long as they're building their systems on kind of credible assessments and data and independent sources, then retailers can really help guide consumers, and yeah, and brands can, as long as they're transparent about it and transparent about what the standards are, then consumers can buy into that. I always talk about the question which I was once asked when I was working on food issues and sustainability about 15 years ago, and people were asking, oh, well, but even when you look for standards, you know, how do you choose between the fair trade beans which come from Kenya or the local beans which are grown in your local area? You know, both of those are good things, and both of those have independent standards. And my answer to that was, don't worry. If you've taken the time to look at whether it's a fair trade bean or a local bean, buy which one you think looks best and will go best with your dinner. Just don't buy the beans which have no standards associated with them. You don't know where they're from, and what that's the key thing, is you're not buying the stuff which you just don't have any idea about, like that. And at the moment, that is a good rule of thumb, and I use it when I shop for clothes. You know, I look for something which I can feel good about in a product, and I don't beat myself up about whether it meets every standard under the sun. Like I'd love it if it did, but actually just looking for something good and positive within a product, I feel like is a good step.
So brands, essentially what you're saying is it's really important that brands communicate the right things clearly to their customers.
Yeah.
You know, the communication part, how, and I think this, again, lots of people have asked this question, how, as a business, can you communicate sustainability effectively to your customers when you often can have such a broad range of customers, some who are super engaged with it and some who really don't care or don't know or have, you know, have very little understanding? Maybe for you, Sandra, that question.
Simply just communicate somewhere for those people that do care. And like we were talking about in the beginning, there's growing number of people that do care, and a Good On You's approach is not to expect brands to include as part of their marketing or positioning what they're doing to address sustainability issues, but just that they have covered somewhere publicly, whether that be in their website or in their shareholder reporting if they're a larger company, but just talk somewhere to what you're doing to address the issues around how you protect people in your supply chain, and how you're thinking about measuring and trying to reduce the environmental impacts of your processes. I think some brands have gone from saying nothing at all to coming out with big claims, big headlines, 100% carbon offset, and I think that that's maybe only adding to consumer skepticism around what brands are really saying. That's a typical sign of greenwashing, because people are looking for brands to take responsibility all the way down the chain, or from the production right through to caring for what happens with the product after they've even sold it. So communicating all of that in a way that is factual and meaningful is, I think, what consumers are looking for, and in turn what then Good On You picks up on and includes in our assessment, in our brand ratings.
Amazing. Now, I'm going to ask a question that's perhaps maybe a slightly difficult question to answer, given that, it's really probably just our current society, but how do we address this issue of really consumerism and the sustainability conversation, when ultimately we need to come to terms with slowing consumption, but obviously brands target, growth. It's all about growth, and that's maybe, it's not necessarily an easy conversation to answer, but particularly this has been something that's come out the back of really the last 3 or 4 months, and we've seen businesses really struggle with excess stock. What does the next 5 to 10 years in your mind, obviously this is just speculative, but how do brands continue to grow, but in the right way? Tom?
Yeah, the big elephant in the room kind of growth question, like it's, always sustainability questions always come down to kind of, does capitalism work? And capitalism is a growth-based model, but for me, the way to think about it as a brand is what you can do to, you're always going to want to grow. Like that, saying that you want to grow, slower is hard. It's kind of what does slow mean, and it's just very difficult to get a clear answer on that. But what I think you can do is try and grow in better ways. So you look to decouple that growth from resource consumption. So where you're basing your growth or your production on either lower impact, zero impact, or even regenerative sources. So you talked about the kind of using dead stock rather than to make smaller quantities of things. That is a better way of producing, and therefore basing your growth on than the other way. So using brand new materials and massive quantities. So it's looking for ways to do that, but then also looking for growth opportunities which aren't based on new materials. So that the way in which we're now looking to make money in the resale market is based on products which already exist. There's kind of, those things aren't new resources being used up. Now they're not zero impact, just because when you move stuff around, you move something from one person to the next, there is impact there. So you have to try and reduce those impacts. So kind of making logistics and supply chains as efficient as possible, but just basing it on those existing products in the market and making money from that is driving growth from a lower impact model. So that's how I would try and answer it. Because I think trying to tackle how much consumption is enough or how much growth is enough is just really hard for any one business to answer. Like society can answer that broadly, if they take decisions at that level, but one business can't. So
what do you think, Sandra?
I think it does need to be said that we simply do need to produce less and consume less if we're going to address the core of some of the problems that we're seeing around the world today. But producing, and I even hate the word consuming and consumers, because it's just rooted in this model that's inherently unsustainable. But buying less new can mean other things. It can mean exploring alternatives, and Tom touched on this, but alternatives to buying new might mean buying secondhand. It might mean renting. It might mean mending and repairing, and all of these are services that brands can provide and companies can provide. And similarly, consumers have a role to play too in considering those alternatives, and also making more considered quality choices. So that, buying more clothes that are cheaper over time could be replaced with fewer purchases at a higher initial cost, but a similar cost per wear that has the same economic outcomes for companies, but fewer environmental and social impacts. And ultimately, we all end up with clothing that we can cherish over time instead of this throwaway culture that we've been sucked into.
Do you think that fast fashion is going to really have to take a look at itself and evolve over the next few years to stay relevant if this is the way the industry is going?
I think as we know it today, there will always be a need for affordable clothing, because, if people are in different situations and might not be able to afford all the luxuries that the fashion industry offers. So there should, hopefully we can support an industry that can provide different options at different prices for those that can afford it at that time. But the model that underpins fast fashion of high turnover, constant production of really cheap disposable clothing, I think, that has to change. But it will be driven by consumer demand that doesn't stand for that kind of model anymore.
Yeah, someone's mentioned in the chat here, does it need a fast fashion tax? Is that do we need to get to that point? And or even, is it about kind of penalizing this?
I think there's always, it's personal opinion. I'm not an expert on government regulation, but I think there always is a role for government regulation, but it's so dependent on your particular location, and as we know, fashion's global. So yeah. A much stronger and more proactive response would come from brands themselves and from those of us that love and buy fashion.
This is a kind of broad question that came in ahead of the webinar around really the biggest barriers for brands to become more sustainable. I think something that the two areas that I've really contemplated over the last 3 months in light of COVID, when everyone kind of slowed down and were forced to take a step back and have a rethink of their ways of working. I feel like for me, one of the biggest barriers is time, pressure, and the pace of the fashion industry. If you don't slow down and reconsider how you're going to operate, if everyone was just moving at 100 miles an hour, and I actually think that this is such an important time, and it needs to continue. And I think that really feeds in for me also around the kind of knowledge and also a mindset thing. I think that for me, like, if the leaders of a fashion business have got to prioritize it, like you mentioned, Tom, that Jose is doing that at Farfetch. It's got to come top down as much as bottom up. And I think something that we really see, because we work cross teams, so we'll work with design, production, marketing, anyone who feeds into the production process, and often we find the sustainability knowledge and mindset and expertise is quite siloed into a team. And for me, the biggest barrier is that it's not across the whole organization, because if one person holds that knowledge, it really doesn't feel, if someone goes, right, you have to do it like this, and by the time it's got down to the designer, the production manager, they don't know the priorities. And so for me, a cross-business mindset, and that has to come top down. I don't know what you think, Tom, on what you think are some of the biggest barriers really in the sustainability movement.
Yeah, like having support from the top is really key. And as you said, we're lucky at Farfetch that Jose and the rest of the exec team and the board are really passionate about it and see it as being a core part of the strategy. But yeah, I mean, what you were saying, sustainability is never ever going to be delivered by one team, like a sustainability team. Like it is required that all parts of a business will have some way or measure for how they are going to contribute to it, and that's really hard to do. You know, it's inherently cross-functional, but also incredibly empowering. Like there are loads of opportunities in lots of different ways for lots of different teams to get involved in a subject which lots of different people are really interested and excited about. You know, who doesn't want to try and make the world a bit of a better place to be in and live in? And so yeah, it's hard to do. I think top-down support is key, but also then in giving people the opportunity and the tools to contribute is also really important. So it's what we've tried to do a lot at Farfetch, and I have done in all of my career as a kind of sustainability professional, is trying to embed that within the different business functions and making it really relevant, not really talking about it in terms of sustainability, because if you say what are you doing to contribute to sustainability, that's really hard. But if you go to someone in the supply chain team and you say what can we do to help reduce costs at the same time as reducing carbon, that might make sense to them. Or you go to the packaging team and you say how can we move away from using any form of plastics and move to renewable resources, or how can we make our packaging as efficient as it can be? That makes a difference. If you go to our fashion team and say how can we promote these brands over and above others because we know that they've got really positive impacts, that naturally lends to their capability. You know, it's kind of making the questions which you ask of those teams really specific, rather than saying how can you embed sustainability in your work. I think that's the key.
That's really useful advice, I imagine, for lots of businesses out there. I mean, what would you say is the first step advice for you for a fashion brand who is listening today who hasn't yet started on their journey? What would you say is that kind of first step towards sustainability?
I guess the first thing I'd do is not make your brand necessarily all about sustainability. Like, I'm a fundamental believer in that consumers buy into, and they still do, they buy into great style, the price which they're willing to pay, and the quality which they want. You know, that hasn't changed. You look at all of the consumer studies out there, that hasn't changed. The key thing that's changed is that sustainability is moving up the agenda in terms of something which they will also look at when they're buying a product. You know, it becomes increasingly part of that buying decision. So yeah, recognize that and don't kind of lose sight on delivering your brand promise in whatever other way you need to get consumers in. But then also, yeah, in terms of what you then can do in terms of sustainability, is just finding the things which make most sense to you as a brand. You know, what do you really want to stand for? There, it's a huge topic, sustainability. You know, Sandra talked about it. You know, thinking about environment in supply chain, in end of life, in all of those aspects, from a people point of view, in terms of the labor standards in your supply chain, whether that's tier 1, tier 2, you know, going down your supply chain, and the animal welfare standards. Are you going to be a vegan brand, or are you just going to have really good, solid animal welfare standards in the sourcing which you have? You know, there's so many different areas, and maybe you want to try and tackle them all, and that's great. But if you're starting out, I wouldn't suggest going for all of them. Like, start in the areas which mean most to you, and talk most to your brand values, whatever brand values they are. Like, what kind of brand do you want to be? What kind of consumer do you want to appeal to? Yeah, so kind of pick 1, 2, 3 of them, go for it. If you get those and they're really easy, bed those in, and then move on and try and deliver some other positive impact. So yeah, don't try and do it all, I guess, is the key thing.
Be ambitious, but don't set unrealistic goals. As earlier. And so, what do you feel are some of the biggest barriers really for brands right now?
I think I've just been nodding furiously for about 10 minutes. Firstly, because I've also been the sustainability and the CSR manager in a large organisation, and I empathize and sympathize with the challenges that it sometimes involves trying to convince people internally that it's core business. But also, agree with what Tom was saying. It's about starting small, and it's similar advice that I give to people and consumers starting out as well. Is think about what's important to you as an individual or as an organisation. Because if it aligns to your values or your business strategy, then it's going to have legs in terms of how you shop and in terms of how you operate as a company. Think about the main issues that matter for you, and then take steps to address those in a way that is actually meaningful and achievable, so that you can see progress and then move on to extending your impact over time. Starting somewhere, doing something meaningful, measurable, getting some scores on the board, and of course being transparent about it.
And I think, just to add to that, I think the key thing often that brands sometimes forget is communicate this with your manufacturers and suppliers and bring them on the journey with you. They are there to help you achieve that. And I think often it's that kind of transactional relationship, and it needs to move towards a kind of strategic collaboration with your manufacturers and suppliers, as they're the only way you're going to get there if you work with them. And that's something that we work really hard with brands to get towards. A question, we've obviously touched a little bit on COVID. What long-lasting impact do you see COVID having on the industry, and potentially ways in which consumers will shop? Either one of you can take that.
So it's a big question. I think it's definitely shone a light on some of the issues we mentioned before around overproduction. Sadly, as a result of the pandemic hitting, we had billions of dollars worth of orders that were cancelled by major brands and left for suppliers who should be partners in the problem. They were just almost left abandoned to deal with the problem. And it's not to underestimate just how much pressure brands have been, especially large brands, have been under recently, but passing that responsibility on to suppliers and really vulnerable workers has been a really sad outcome of COVID. And linked to that are the environmental issues of literally piles of clothing, of waste that now need to be dealt with. So I think COVID's put a spotlight on some things we were already worried about, and I think have served to raise concern and awareness among buyers of fashion. And as a result, people are wanting more and more to get behind sustainable brands. They're asking new questions maybe about brands that are protecting their workers through COVID, and we've just actually updated our rating system to reflect that as an indicator as well. And in the future, consumers might want to know, or will be asking the question, what did this brand do to support workers during this time, and not to let issues of environmental waste escalate during this time.
It definitely feels like the supply chains have hit kind of broadsheet headlines during this period. And I feel I'm getting the sense that consumers are being more rigorous in their questioning of what brands are up to. And I hope that stays and just gets more and more. We've got 10 minutes left, and there's lots of questions in the Q&A. So I'm just going to pick some out. Tom, what other technologies and innovations are Farfetch adopting or engaging with to push forth the sustainability agenda? Obviously, you've touched on a few, but any you can talk
about? Well, haven't we talked about? And I said we've got these kind of 3 pillars, so maybe I'll just think through them and pick out a couple of things. So on the cleaner pillar, like how do we make it operationally more efficient? The things I'm really excited about is new fitting technologies, which we're looking at and piloting, which will hopefully dramatically reduce returns. You know, that's a big issue in e-commerce particularly, and you know, the technology piece will really help there. Yeah, on the conscious side, I guess the innovations in that area are coming through from brands. I'm really excited about the work. And you were talking about asking your partners and suppliers about things. I think the fact that we've made really clear criteria for what we qualify as conscious, and communicated that to brand partners and boutique partners, which Farfetch has really helped. And we now see like people coming to us and saying, look, we've got this coming through, and you know, we'd love to feature it as part of your positively conscious effort. So that's, you know, that's really heartening to see. Yeah, and then on the circular piece, you know, I talked about the resale and donations piece, but there are a bunch of other services which we're looking at and exploring, from repairs to rentals to even kind of, we haven't really talked about it, but the whole concept of something being made to order. So there's some amazing tech solutions out there where you effectively help better match supply and demand by not having this kind of make loads of stuff and hope it sells model, but actually just make the stuff which consumers either order or that you know they want, and like the kind of capabilities which we have at Farfetch around data to apply to that, but also in terms of building in tech solutions to help enable that kind of made to order piece will help naturally reduce waste in fashion. So there's so much stuff going on, but yeah, it's all,
I mean, I think the thing I feel is that even in just the last 2 years, there's so many exciting new innovations, and I think that you know, seeing innovation happening in the fashion industry is really exciting beyond the kind of retail side. I think happening in the supply chain is really exciting. Don't know if that's just because I'm sad I've been working in it for a few years, but it is really exciting. So Sandra, what is the actual process for brands who are listening to get rated on Good On You? From kind of how do they start that journey with you?
So far we've rated close to 3,000 brands last count. And it sounds like a lot, but it's really just, you know, tip of the iceberg in terms of the size of the industry. And Good On You is contacted every day by brands that want to be rated and want to be included on our platform. We also get requests from users of our platform. They can use the Good On You app to suggest a brand for us to rate. We're of course rating brands for some of our partners and clients like Farfetch, who are assessing their own portfolio. So we have a really long list, a long backlog of brands to rate and get through. We try and prioritize those that are in high demand by those groups, by brands that are contacting us, by our users, our communities who are requesting them, and by our clients who want to use the ratings on their own platform. So ratings can take you know, anywhere from days to, unfortunately, we have some on our backlog that have been there for a much longer time, and we are we're doing our best to prioritize and to scale our tech so we can keep automating how we can assess them and keep adding more and more brands to our platform and the platforms of our partners.
What does the kind of next 2 to 3 years look like for Good On You? What you can share, obviously you don't need to say everything, but what's your vision?
Thousands more brands, millions more shoppers, and you know, great partnerships that allow us to really get the information out there to help customers buy better and use their power to shift the industry to be more sustainable.
Amazing. I'm gonna end by getting you two to actually ask a question to each other. Tom, can you ask a question to Sandra?
What is the most asked for, or from a consumer perspective, what are consumers most interested in your ratings? Like, are they most interested in environment, social, or animal? Like, they, you know, those 3 core areas, or do you have a sense of that?
Good question.
Yeah, I think it's changing over time, and it's a little bit different depending on where you are, but we've definitely seen a rise in people's concern for climate change and climate impacts, and how fashion is responding to that in the last 12 months. There's also been a rise of veganism and people wanting to buy clothes that don't impact on animals. And I think COVID has put some focus back on the human impacts of fashion as well. So, you know, that's why we do keep a focus on those three areas. But it is definitely different for different people. Sustainability has many different meanings, and the broader topic of ethics in fashion means different things to different people. So, yeah, I guess they're three key things we've noticed, but it's hugely variable.
Cool.
And for you, if you could change one thing about Positively Conscious, what would it be?
I'd love to make it easier for our consumers to leverage the data that we have, and to find the products that we have. Like, we've only just started really, and I think we've done some great things in terms of helping consumers buy into more positive fashion choices, but there's so much more that we could do around integrating it into the customer journey, providing recommendations and kind of cross-selling opportunities where someone's interested in one particular bit of sustainability or a sustainable brand, and just highlighting that there's so much more that they can go after. Like, because it's such a huge area, like, I think consumers generally need help and support in kind of understanding it, basically, if they are interested, or just kind of pointers to move. And I just think we've got a great opportunity to do that at Farfetch. It's actually much easier to do that in an online environment than it is in a kind of traditional retail environment. And that, you know, that's the thing I'm most excited about, is just kind of being able to guide and help consumers in their journey when they're shopping online. So
amazing. All right, well, it is the end of the webinar. Thank you so much for joining us for this conversation. It was really, really interesting. For those who have missed it, or people who have colleagues they want to share it on with, we will be sharing a recording of this within the next 24 hours by email. So thank you again, and take care.
Thank you.
Bye. Thanks, Flora. Thanks, everyone.